The global financial crisis, which we would like very much to call the past financial crisis, remains, and is under everybody's eyes, a main challenge. The way the international community has responded to the Greek crisis and the risk of a generalized financial meltdown deserve, I believe, in our discussion, a special place as a reference, and Professor Tria was already doing that, in the context of a debate on governance. Last May in Brussels, the EU members approved a loan mechanism, the European Financial Stability Mechanism and Facility, for Eurozone countries facing difficulties. And they set up an emergency fund of up to 500 billion euros. They decided to reduce public expenditure and to balance their budget. At the same time, the IMF pledged, as we know, 250 billion euros as a contingency measure in the event of a crisis. All that was, in essence, an excellent message to market and to public opinions that the transatlantic cooperation is active and alive when it is tested. The most recent ECOFIN, a few days ago, have reinforced this message. A message aimed, as it is, at strengthening financial governance and at laying the ground for supervision and renewed financial architecture. Some watchdogs were created for banks, for insurance and pension funds, and for markets. And in addition, the European Systemic Risk Board was established to help assess and prevent potential risk to financial stability in the Eurozone and in the rest of the European Union. This approach is benefiting, in my view, the entire system. Indeed, further serious crisis in the Eurozone would have created a domino effect, disruptive for many other countries beyond the Eurozone, and would have been surely felt from Washington to Beijing. What I've just mentioned highlights the main aspects which should distinguish the new governance as it is taking shape. First, networking with all its benefits. Second, flexibility as a key element. Third, pragmatism as a value. And fourth, responsibility as an indispensable principle. The first element, networking, emerged very clearly from the global crisis and from the way it was tackled, the way of efficiency, which I would say indispensability of networking among all major players emerged very vividly. In this case, networking between an international organization such as the European Union, a financial institution as the IMF, and a key partner as the United States. There are other significant examples of networking, not necessarily in the financial and economic area, and since we are talking about global governance, it is proper to address also these elements. Just think of growing collaboration between the UN, the US, and the EU in peacekeeping and international security. For example, recently in Brussels, the Undersecretary General for Peacekeeping Operation, Alain Leroy, underlined, because of the overstretching the UN is feeling in the question in the peacekeeping worldwide, that peacekeeping must increasingly involve all the European members together with the main financial contributors to the UN budget, starting with the US. So there is a strong wish that also P5 will increase their contribution, and this is an element also which could add a lot to the global governance. The second element I mentioned is flexibility. The EU financial measures not only were significant because of their political weight, but even more importantly by their ability to underscore the European capacity and flexibility so that they were able to react in over 48 hours in the moment of a crisis. This applies also to areas of international security which belong more to the Atlantic dimension than to the Lisbon Treaty. Flexibility has been, in fact, over the last decade, one of NATO's keys success in adjusting to a changing environment, in transforming the way in which NATO does business. Third, as a third element, I mentioned pragmatism. The pragmatism, again, by which Europe, the United States, and the IMF, to mention my initial example, responded to the crisis, showed how often good is preferable to excellent. There was criticism at the time on the slowness in adopting a suitable economic package, but at the end, by pursuing what was indeed necessary and achievable, the European Union, I underline again in close cooperation with the US, overcame the turmoil. In a wider perspective, my country has always aimed at strong economic and political integration as a key element of global governance and a key element of an effective international system. May I recall what the President of the Italian Republic said here in Washington on May 26 in front of the Congress, and I quote, "Is the European Union today up to its potential and able to fully shoulder its responsibilities? My answer is that it can do much more and much better if we strengthen our unity and our integration." End of quote. Europe and the United States finally felt it was their responsibility, and this is my fourth point, to intervene with some bold measures following this spring emergency. Allow me again to tie Italy to this. It is the same principle of responsibility which underlies our action in the international context. From the Middle East to Afghanistan, from the fight on terror to the efforts in favor of disarmament and non-proliferation, it is important to understand that Italy's presence and Italy's role is global. And only a couple of days ago, to the Secretary General of NATO, there was the anticipation by the Prime Minister that in principle Italy will do a further effort in the training aspect by 2012, training of the Afghan police and Afghan army. My country, I'd like also, this is an opportunity to recall it, is the first contributor to UN Blue Helmets among G8 members, and we rank 6th in terms of budgetary contribution to UN mission. At this point, maybe it would be useful to add a very short food for thought. First, never as today, and that appears to be an irreversible phenomenon, have problems at such a universal reach whilst being so closely connected. And again, the speakers before me have made this point. Indeed, the development of alternate forms of energy, such as the nuclear one, have evident repercussions not only in the context of climate change and protection of the environment, but also in the context of classical foreign policy and international security. This is what prompted the need for a new governance, inspired by a global and multi-theme vision of the phenomena to be governed. On the growing interconnection and horizontality of world dynamics, suffice it to mention what happened 2 years ago when the price of rice and of different foods such as wheat, flour, and soybeans skyrocketed in just a few months. And we saw a repetition of this risk and this worrisome trend with the Pakistani flood and the destruction by fire of Russian crops. Secondly, the new context entails reviewing and updating the international institutional architecture. It is also true that the state actors must govern the governance and avoid, most importantly, that the latter, the governance, be governed by crises and emergencies. Third, the reform process must be promoted with an eye to evolution and not revolution. Better said, we should avoid the temptation to scrap existing organization, and our report has been this theme in New York about whether they invent a new organization when totally refound the international system, maybe basing on certain values which are not as global and as widely understood as those of the UN Charter. Let me refer to the alleged conflict between the various G+ formats. Ambassador Magliano mentioned the summit in L'Aquila, and in fact, in Aquila, the Italian presidency invited Brazil, China, India, Mexico, South Africa, and Egypt with the intent to include these countries, not on the basis of numbers or artificial architectures like G13, not that they are artificial, but we were really trying to invite the major players for functional reasons and with a view to helping solve concrete problems. And it is indeed policy objectives which must suggest formats and not vice versa, in our opinion. More generally, we must be able to guarantee that the various organizations, in particular the G8 and the new Forum for Financial and Economic Crisis Management, the top forum for crisis management, the G20, are coordinated and they complement each other. A final observation on the need for good governance. We should again resist the temptation of promoting hasty reforms outside the scope of a wide and shared framework. That is to say, reforms inspired by criteria that nowadays, at least my government at least, considers obsolete. Also, in a quick reference, also in the light of previous professional experience, to the old but very present question of the reform of the Security Council of the United Nations. 16 years after the start of this debate, the continuing contrast on the reform models of the Security Council exemplify two different views of the changes which should be brought to governance for multilateral security. On the one hand, there are the countries which think that we should return for certain principle to the 1945 model. On the other hand, there are countries which favor a more flexible and inclusive approach. Italy has always maintained a firm opposition to any hypothesis of enlargement, which entailed increasing the number of permanent seats. We believe that more permanent members wouldn't contribute to enhancing either the efficacy of the Council action or its representativeness. Thus, we have consistently promoted reforms centered on periodical election of new members of the Council, the only means, in our opinion, to ensure the effective responsibility towards the rest of the membership. And keeping this fundamental principle in mind, the Italian approach has always been flexible, and in these years, together with a group of like-minded countries, we have proposed formulas of possible enlargement to new non-permanent members of the Security Council, always looking at better representativeness, efficacy, and transparency. These are elements which we believe could be referred very properly to, both on the economic side and the international security side, as it was articulated in the program, in our discussion, and I wish really the best result and all the interest to this debate. Thank you very much.